the clinic doors sighed shut behind me, and I stood under the awning like I'd forgotten how to move through a normal afternoon. The fluorescent light inside had bleached everything into a dull honesty, and it still clung to my eyes. In my hand, the ultrasound printout felt too thin to carry this much weight. Black and white shapes. A small, bright flicker, the technician had pointed out, with practiced calm. The kind of proof you can fold into your pocket, even when it rearranges your whole life. Outside, Boston was soaked in early fall rain. The sky hung low and gray, and the wind pushed mist sideways between passing cars. The sidewalk smelled like wet concrete and exhaust, with a thread of coffee from somewhere down the block. My sweatshirt stuck to my arms. My stomach wasn't exactly sick. It was hollow, like my body had decided to hold its breath until I figured out what to do. I tried to think in steps. Get to the tea. Pick up Leo. Make dinner. Make everything look normal. I could do normal. I was good at it. Leo is 6, all sharp questions and sudden tenderness. He can make a joke out of a broken crayon, then cry because his socks feel wrong. This morning he'd asked why I'd been quiet lately, and I'd told him I was tired, because tired is the safest word I know. I kissed his forehead, handed him his lunch, and smiled the way moms smile when they're trying to hide the edge of a cliff behind their teeth. Now that cliff was in my hand, damp at the corners. I stared at it and thought about the kind of mother I want to be. The kind who doesn't panic in front of her kid. The kind who finds a way. The kind who can hold fear and still keep her voice steady at bedtime. My phone sat heavy in my pocket, and I kept touching it like it might suddenly give me an answer. Not just about the pregnancy, about Ethan. Ethan Cole has been gone for 3 weeks. I can measure it in unanswered calls and the way my apartment feels louder at night. 3 weeks since he left after dinner, said he had to handle something, and then slipped out of my life like a door closing quietly in another room. No explanation that held up, no reassurance that lasted, just silence that started to feel intentional. I've tried every version of reasonable. I've told myself he's overwhelmed, that he'll come back with a story that makes sense if I don't press too hard. But the truth is, I don't know where he is. I don't know what he's tied to. And now, with this printout in my hand, I don't get the luxury of not knowing. Money doesn't let you float in uncertainty. Rent, after-school care, groceries that keep climbing, the little charges that pile up like sand in your shoes. I've been stretching my paycheck with quiet tricks, making pasta twice, buying store-brand cereal, cutting my own hair in the bathroom mirror. I don't tell anyone the exact number in my bank app because the number makes it feel like a verdict. I just keep moving, because Leo deserves steadiness even when I'm not sure I have it. I should have told Tessa Nguyen the second I walked out. Tessa is my best friend, the person who can hear the truth under my careful tone. She knows my habits, my weak spots, the way I pretend I'm fine until I'm not. She also knows Leo, knows he watches me for cues, knows I'm always balancing on the thin line between survival and hope. I pulled my phone out under the awning and wiped rain from the screen with my sleeve. My fingers felt clumsy, numb from cold and adrenaline. I opened my messages and saw Tessa's name, and relief hit me so fast it felt like safety. I lifted the ultrasound printout and snapped a quick photo, because part of me needed it to be real in more than one place. The camera focused, unfocused, then caught the grainy curve and that bright flicker that made my throat tighten. I typed a message to Tessa with the kind of honesty I only allow in private. I told her I'd just left the clinic. I told her it was positive. I told her I was scared, and that Ethan's absence suddenly felt like a trapdoor under my feet. The rain tapped the metal edge of the awning like impatient fingers. I glanced toward the tea station, already thinking about Leo's pickup time, already rehearsing my normal voice for when he ran into my arms. My thumb hovered, and the moment felt ordinary, like every other time I've reached out for help. Then I hit send. The photo slid forward. The message followed. For half a second, my shoulders dropped, like I'd handed the weight to someone who could share it. I set the phone down on top of my tote bag and let myself breathe. And then I looked at the top of the screen. Not Tessa, a different thread. A number I didn't recognize. I stared at it as the rain kept falling, and a finality settled in my gut. I told myself to calm down, told myself I'd fix it after I picked up Leo. Maybe take a quick shower to rinse off the day and reset my brain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the smallest, most ordinary mistake had just opened a door I didn't mean to touch, and whatever notification came next would not be from her. I didn't delete the message right away. I just stood under the clinic awning with rain sliding off my sleeve, watching strangers hurry past like the world hadn't tipped. The ultrasound printout was folded in my fist, and it felt unreal that a thin piece of paper could rearrange a life. By the time I got back to my apartment in Dorchester, I was soaked through and running on habit. I kicked off my shoes, hung my jacket, and tried to make the place look normal. Leo's dinosaur backpack leaned against the wall. Seeing it tightened my throat. He was at my mom's tonight, a small mercy. But the quiet also meant there was nothing to distract me from what I was holding. I set the phone face down on the counter like it could burn me. Then I turned on the shower, because water is the only thing that reliably resets my brain. I let the hot water hit my shoulders until my muscles remembered they were allowed to unclench. I told myself I'd done the responsible thing by reaching out. I told myself my best friend, Tessa Nguyen, would answer with something steady and practical, the way she always does. I pictured her seeing the photo, understanding exactly what it meant, and sending me a lifeline that didn't make a scene of it. When I stepped out, towel wrapped tight, my apartment felt colder than before. The phone was still on the counter. The screen lit up as soon as I got close, and my stomach reacted before my mind did. A notification. For a split second, relief flickered. I expected Tessa. It wasn't her. The thread at the top was a number I didn't recognize, bare and impersonal. My brain tried to call it a glitch. Then the memory of my thumb hitting send snapped into focus, and shame flooded in hot and fast. I picked up the phone and saw that the number had responded. Not with the confusion you'd expect from a stranger, but with a tone that felt like someone leaning too close. My first instinct was embarrassment, the kind that makes you want to disappear. I typed quickly, explaining it was meant for someone else, asking them to delete it, apologizing more than once because panic makes me overcompensate. The response came back almost instantly. It didn't accept the apology. It didn't behave like a normal wrong number. It suggested I knew who I was texting. It implied the photo wasn't the surprising part. That was when my body shifted. My hands went cold. My shoulders rose. The room felt too quiet, like it was listening. I tried again, firmer. I told the number to stop contacting me. I made it clear they were crossing a line and I wanted no interaction. The next message ignored my boundary like it was optional, and then it referenced Ethan. Not in a way that felt like a guess. In a way that felt like a file someone already had open. The message implied I'd been writing to this number for weeks, that it wasn't new to them, that my words hadn't been disappearing into the void the way I'd told myself they were. My thumb scrolled up through the last 3 weeks, and my heart started pounding harder with every inch. Check-ins I'd tried to keep casual. Late-night messages I'd softened into normal sentences. Notes about Leo's school schedule. Worries I hadn't wanted to say out loud. And underneath all of it, the thing I'd been refusing to name. Ethan Cole had vanished 3 weeks ago, and I'd been texting into silence like I could will him back. I looked at the number in the thread, then at the one saved in my contacts. They were close. A couple digits off. The kind of difference exhaustion can erase. I replayed that first night Ethan didn't come home, when my hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. I realized I might have typed the wrong thread and then kept going, day after day, because admitting it would have meant admitting how alone I felt. If Ethan never got my messages, then his silence meant something else. It meant he hadn't ignored me, or it meant he'd changed his number and never told me, or it meant he'd walked away so cleanly I didn't even have the right line to reach him. And the most disturbing part was simpler. Someone else had been receiving everything I'd spilled into those texts, watching me expose my soft spots like they were coordinates. I tried to tell myself it was just a creep, someone enjoying the power of making me uncomfortable. But the next hint moved my fear from personal to structural. It suggested Ethan had been involved in serious business, the kind with rules and consequences. It carried the quiet certainty that people like that don't let someone disappear without a reason. Not if money is owed, not if loyalty is broken. I sat on the edge of the couch, phone heavy in my palm. My mind started replaying my days without asking permission. Leo's bus stop, my coffee stop, my commute, the times I'm alone. I looked around my apartment and suddenly felt how predictable my life is, and how easily the next messages could prove that the stranger already knows it down to the minute, too. I sat there with my phone in my hand like it was a live wire, and my mind started running my life back like security footage. Leo's bus stop on the corner where the bakery smell drifts out even in the rain. The little coffee place I hit because the barista doesn't ask questions when I look exhausted. The Red Line platform where I stand under the same flickering sign, scrolling to pretend I'm not alone. Every step of my day suddenly looked like a pattern someone could memorize. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Boston is crowded. People notice things. But the dread wouldn't let go, because the messages didn't feel like someone guessing. They felt like someone checking boxes. Another notification came through, and my throat tightened before I even read it. The first line implied they knew my building, not just my neighborhood. It referenced the cracked front step and the way the lobby door sticks when it's humid. I hadn't posted that anywhere. I barely complained about it out loud. My eyes went to my apartment door as if the wood could answer for me. Then the next message narrowed the focus. It wasn't just where I lived, it was when I moved. It hinted at the time I usually came home, the way I always paused to dig for my keys before the porch light catches my hands. It made a small note about the nights I forget to pull the blinds all the way down. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain to anyone without sounding dramatic. I stood up and walked my apartment like I was doing a checklist at work. The deadbolt, the chain, the window latch in the living room, the kitchen window that never fully closes unless you shove it, the fire escape outside the bedroom, slick with rain. I listened for the hallway sounds I normally ignore. Someone's TV murmuring, water moving through pipes, a door 2 units down opening and shutting. Everything was normal. That was the worst part. Normal is what you rely on until it turns against you. I told myself to call the police. I even opened the keypad and hovered over it. But the idea of explaining this to a dispatcher made my stomach twist. What was I supposed to say? That a stranger texted me details about my life? That I might have accidentally handed them a map by pouring my worry into the wrong thread for 3 weeks? I imagined the polite questions, the delay, the report that goes nowhere because no one has technically done anything yet. And I hated how helpless that thought made me feel. From the bedroom came Leo's soft breathing, the little whistle he gets when allergies hit. I kept my footsteps light, like the floorboards could betray us. I pressed my palm to the wall, grounding myself. Another message landed, and this time it wasn't about me. It carried a detail that made my vision blur for a second, like my brain refused to process it. It implied they'd noticed Leo's habit of hopping off the bus and running ahead, like the sidewalk is a racetrack. It referenced the little blue jacket with the missing zipper pull that I keep meaning to replace. It suggested they knew I always let him press the crosswalk button because it makes him feel in charge of something. My whole body went hot, then cold. I didn't need threats. I didn't need ugly words. The fact that Leo had been observed at all turned my fear into something sharper. Protective fury isn't loud at first. It's quiet. It makes you see exits. It makes you calculate. I paced back to the kitchen and forced myself to breathe slowly, the way I do when Leo gets sick and I have to stay calm for him. I tried to think like an adult who still believes in systems, police, friends, neighbors, but all of those options felt slow, and this felt fast tonight. The next exchange shifted again, like a mask dropping. The tone stopped circling my routine and started framing everything as a problem to solve. The person on the other end acted like this was business, like I was a loose end attached to Ethan Cole, not a woman with a kid and a rent payment and a body already trying to carry too much. That was when the motive hit, heavy and exact. They claimed Ethan stole $2 million and a flash drive with sensitive material. The numbers didn't feel like a bluff because they were too clean, too specific, delivered like a fact that had been repeated many times. I stared at the screen and felt my own shame rise up like bile. Not because I had the money or the drive. I didn't. I barely had enough in my checking account to get through the month without juggling bills. The shame came from the small things I'd ignored with Ethan because I wanted to believe the best version of him. The nights he paid for dinner like it was nothing, then laughed it off when I offered my card. The way he always had cash, always had a reason, always had a story that sounded almost normal. I'd called it romance, because that was easier than calling it cover. I'd called it generosity, because that was easier than asking what kind of job makes a man that slippery. And now, with the clinic paper still on my counter, I realized how badly I'd wanted a safe story. I wanted Ethan to be the kind of man who would show up for a baby announcement, not the kind of man who could vanish and leave a debt behind him like a shadow. The person messaging me pushed for information I didn't have. They treated my denial like a delay tactic. They insisted I knew more than I was admitting. They wanted to meet in person, and my skin crawled at how quickly they tried to move from my phone into my space. I refused. I made myself do it calmly, even though my hands shook. I told them I didn't have what they wanted, and I wasn't meeting anyone. I warned them I would involve the police. I didn't know if that threat meant anything, but I needed to say it because silence felt like surrender. For a moment, nothing came back. The screen stayed still. The quiet in my apartment stretched out, and I hated how hope tried to sneak in, like maybe the boundary worked, like maybe they'd move on to someone else. I was still standing in the kitchen when the sound hit my door. Not a polite knock, not a neighbor. a hard, urgent pounding that made the peephole rattle and the frame vibrate, like someone had decided waiting was over. The pounding didn't sound like a neighbor. It sounded like a decision. My whole body snapped awake. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand, staring at the door as if it might explain itself. The frame shuddered again, not frantic, measured. Whoever was out there knew exactly how to make themselves impossible to ignore. I checked the deadbolt, then the chain, then the cheap wedge I'd shoved under the door months ago after a break-in 2 floors down. The phone felt slick, like it didn't want to stay with me. I thought about calling 911 and still opened the keypad, but my thumb hovered over the numbers like they were a confession. My first thought was Leo. It was pure instinct. Even though I knew he wasn't here tonight. He was safe with my mom in Quincy. That childcare plan had been set for weeks. Now it was the only thing keeping my panic from turning into something reckless. Because if Leo had been in this apartment, I would have fought without thinking. And if I fought, I might lose the one thing that mattered more than my pride, my ability to get back to him. I forced my breathing into something quieter. I crept to the peephole and leaned in. 2 men stood in the hallway like they belonged there. Dark suits that fit perfectly, coats beaded with rain, hands relaxed at their sides. No swagger, no jittery energy. Their calm wasn't comforting, it was a warning. One of them lifted his chin slightly, just enough to tell me he knew I was watching. Not a threat, a fact. I stepped back, pressed my palm to my chest, and tried to borrow steadiness from the wall behind me. I raised my voice just enough to carry through the door and implied that police were already involved, that help was on the way. The answer came low and patient. No argument, no fear, just the quiet certainty that my bluff didn't matter. A pause followed, then a soft knock that felt even worse than the pounding. Polite. Final. My mind ran a fast inventory. Don't open. Call 911. Hide. Run. And then my brain did what it always does when Leo is involved. It measured every option against the morning, against my mother answering her phone, against Leo waking up and asking where I was. If I turned this into a scene in my apartment, I might not make it back to him quickly. If I disappeared without a trace, the people hunting Ethan could decide my son was leverage. Even if they never said it, the risk existed the moment they showed up at my door. Control wasn't about winning tonight. It was about surviving long enough to return home. I slid the chain off and cracked the door. The hallway air was colder than my apartment and smelled faintly like rain and clean cologne. The men didn't rush inside. They didn't have to. One angled his body so I could see his face clearly, and his calm made my bluff feel childish. The other kept his gaze on my hands, not my eyes. Without raising his voice, the first man made it clear I had a choice. Cooperate and be treated like a guest. Resist and be treated like a problem. The exact words didn't matter. His posture did the translating. For a split second, I thought of Ethan. Of the way he'd laughed too easily when I asked where he'd been. Of the way he'd turned questions into romance. Like my doubts were a mood he could kiss away. I'd wanted to believe him so badly that I'd called it love instead of denial. I unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door. They gave me a short time limit to get dressed and come with them. 3 minutes. Not shouted, just stated like a schedule. My stomach dropped. I nodded once, because nodding was faster than arguing. Inside, my body took over. Jeans, a sweater, sneakers, wallet, keys. I didn't grab a coat. I didn't want to look like I was packing. I wanted to look like I could still come back. Then the maternal panic hit again. Sharper this time. The need to leave something behind. Evidence. A breadcrumb. Proof that I hadn't chosen to vanish. I opened my messages and started a note to my mom. But my fingers shook, and my thoughts kept tripping over each other. I pictured her reading it in the dark and driving into Boston alone. I deleted the draft. In the end, I did something small and ordinary. I wrote a note on the back of an envelope with a pen that barely worked. I told my mother I loved her. I reminded her Leo's inhaler was in the blue backpack pocket. I added that if I didn't answer, she should trust her instincts and keep Leo close. No names, no details, just the shape of my care. I tucked the envelope under the fruit bowl on the counter, where I knew I'd see it if I came home, and where someone else might miss it if they searched quickly. My phone buzzed again. I didn't look. I couldn't afford more words in my head. When I stepped back into the hallway, the men were in the same spots, like they hadn't needed to shift their weight. One nodded toward the stairwell, and I followed, keeping my shoulders straight because fear is easier to read when you hunch. On the stairs, every step felt too loud. Somewhere behind a door, a television murmured, Ordinary life leaking into my nightmare. I kept my phone tucked against my thigh, screen dark, pretending I wasn't trying to catch a bar of service. I memorized small things like survival tricks, the cufflinks on one man's wrist, the faint scar at the other man's hairline, the smell of wet leather when he passed me. Anything I could describe later, if I got the chance, clearly. At the first floor, the front door opened before I reached for it, and cold rain air slid in like a hand. A black SUV waited at the curb, tinted windows, spotless body. The kind of vehicle that doesn't belong on my street. One of the men guided me into the back seat without touching me, and that restraint made it worse. Like they didn't need force. Like the system itself was the force. The door shut with a heavy, padded sound. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass and barely recognized my own face. As we pulled away, I looked up and saw a dark shape cutting across the low clouds. A helicopter, close enough that the air seemed to thicken around it, hovering like a shadow with purpose. My stomach turned over. This wasn't a petty threat. This was an operation. The kind that moves people fast, above normal rules, above neighborhoods, above the assumptions you build your life on. I kept my eyes on that silhouette until the building swallowed it, and I understood, with dread that felt like awe, that when they demanded I come now, they meant now. The first thing they did was put headphones over my ears. Not the cheap kind that leak sound, but thick, padded ones that pressed my hair flat and made the world go quiet in a way that felt wrong. The helicopter was still screaming inches away, but the noise turned into a muted pulse, like thunder heard through a wall. I could still feel the rotor thump in my ribs, each beat moving through my chest as if my body had become part of the aircraft. A harness crossed my shoulders and buckled tight at my waist. I tested it once, out of reflex, like that would change the reality that I was strapped into someone else's plan. The man across from me didn't watch my face. He watched my hands, my knees, the small movements that might mean panic. I forced myself still. Boston fell away faster than my mind could catch up. From above, the city became dim gold stitched together by black water. The Charles looked like a ribbon laid down with care. Even the rain seemed different up here. Not something that soaked your cuffs, but a mist sliding past the glass. I hated that a part of me noticed any of it. That part made me feel guilty, like I was betraying Leo by letting my eyes soften for a second. I pictured him at my mom's place, asleep in the bed with the lighthouse sheets, one knee bent the way he always sleeps when he's finally comfortable. I tried to imagine the exact moment he would wake up and reach for me without thinking, and the way my absence would land. I wanted to text my mother. I wanted to leave another breadcrumb. But my phone was gone. I hadn't even seen when they took it. 1 second it had been in my pocket, the next my pocket was empty, and the men acted like that was as normal as taking my shoes at the door. We moved north, past darker stretches where the land looked like velvet. I saw water again, wider now, and then the coastline, jagged and cold. The lights thinned. The city became a rumor behind us. My stomach kept lifting in small waves as we changed altitude, and every time it did, my fear surged with it, searching for something to grab. When we descended, the headphones came off. Sound rushed back in like a slap. The rotor hammered the air. My own breath sounded loud and strange, like I'd been holding it for miles. Cold wind tore at my sweater as I stepped down onto a private helipad rimmed with low lights. The air smelled of pine and salt and wet stone. It was the scent of New England when it wants you to remember winter is always waiting. For a second, everything went quiet again as the helicopter lifted and drifted away, leaving a ringing in my ears. Ahead of me, the estate rose from the cliff like it had always belonged there. Not a place that begged to be seen, not something dripping with bright glass. This was older, heavier, pale stone and dark slate, lines that felt European in their restraint, but planted firmly in the stubborn landscape. The kind of wealth that didn't perform because it didn't have to. Warm light glowed behind a few windows, not many, as if even the rooms were selective about what they revealed. A path led from the helipad through grounds that looked untouched by the rain. Gravel that didn't shift, hedges trimmed with surgical precision, trees positioned like decisions. I noticed cameras only because I forced myself to look. Tiny lenses tucked into eaves, disguised in stone, angled to cover every approach. Security stood back from the walkway, almost invisible, but I could feel their attention like pressure against my skin. A fortress, dressed as a home. The front doors were tall and plain, and they opened before anyone reached for a handle. Inside, warmth wrapped around me, but it wasn't comforting. It was controlled, filtered, the exact temperature someone had decided was correct. That's when I saw her. Elena Mercer didn't greet me with softness. She appeared like a function of the house. Silver hair swept into a smooth twist, posture straight, clothes tailored in quiet colors that didn't draw the eye. She looked like a woman in her 50s who had spent decades mastering the art of efficiency. Not cruel, not kind, simply certain. She studied me the way people in hospitals study charts, and I felt myself become a set of facts. Wet cuffs, shaking hands. I tried to hide, mascara that had probably smudged from the earlier rain. I told myself to stand taller. I told myself to breathe like a person who still had choices. Elena moved first, and I followed because the alternative was to stay in the entry hall and break apart. The interior swallowed sound. My sneakers barely whispered on the marble floor. The ceilings were high enough to make you feel small without trying. Art hung on the walls that looked museum level, not decorative, each piece lit with careful restraint. Nothing felt personal. No family photos, no clutter. The house was immaculate in a way that made my skin itch, like perfection had teeth. Every door we passed felt too heavy. Every latch clicked with the finality of a vault. Elena guided me down a corridor where the lighting grew softer, and the silence became so deep I could hear my own blood in my ears. At the end, she opened a study and motioned me inside with the same calm she might use to seat a guest for an appointment. The study was smaller than I expected, but denser. Dark wood shelves lined the walls. Leather chairs sat near a low table. A desk faced a window, and beyond it the water stretched black and endless, reflecting a thin scatter of moonlight. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how far I was from everything familiar. Elena left without lingering. The door closed with a soft, decisive sound, and then I was alone, breathing in leather and old books, listening to the house settle, waiting for footsteps that would change my life. The study stayed so still that I started hearing things that weren't there. A clock somewhere in the hall. My thoughts kept trying to stack into neat lines, like if I arranged them correctly I could solve my way out of this. Then the air changed. I didn't hear the door open at first. I felt a presence enter the room the way you feel pressure shift before a storm. My shoulders tightened. My hands went cold against the leather chair I hadn't chosen. I stood anyway, because staying seated felt like surrender. He stepped in without hurry, and somehow that was the first thing that scared me. People who rush are excited. People who move like they have all the time in the world are certain they own it. Matteo De Luca didn't look like the cartoon villain my brain had tried to invent. No loud suit, no glitter, no performance. He wore dark, simple clothes that fit perfectly. The kind of quality you notice only because it doesn't ask to be noticed. His hair was neat. His face was calm in a way that made my throat tighten. Like emotion was something he kept behind a door he chose when to open. He looked at me once, fully, the way a professional looks at a problem. I knew I was being measured. Not just my fear, but my posture. The fact that I kept my hands visible. The fact that my eyes kept drifting to the exit like I could become a different person if I moved fast enough. He didn't crowd me. He didn't touch me. He stayed at a controlled distance, as if the room had invisible lines he never crossed unless he meant it. That restraint cracked something in my expectations. I had braced for cruelty. Instead, I got quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. He motioned toward a glass on the desk. When I noticed what was inside, it wasn't liquor. It was water, clear and cold, already poured as if someone had anticipated thirst. That small detail landed hard. It told me he liked order. No messy intimidation. No chaos he couldn't contain. When he began to explain, his voice stayed low and even, and that made everything feel heavier. He laid it out like a business report. Ethan Cole had been in his world for years. Not a boyfriend. Not an accident. An asset who earned access through reliability and silence. Ethan learned routines, names, routes, and the parts of other men's lives they thought were invisible. Then Ethan stole. Not a few thousand. Not a bag of cash. Matteo stated it as a fact that didn't need anger to sharpen it. $2 million was gone, along with a flash drive packed with sensitive data. The kind of information that could expose people, shift leverage, and trigger retaliation from corners I couldn't even name. And then Ethan vanished 3 weeks ago. Hearing the timeline out loud made my stomach drop because it matched the hollow space in my own life perfectly. The same 3 weeks I'd been telling myself, Ethan was overwhelmed. The same 3 weeks I'd been texting what I thought was his number, sending updates about Leo's spelling tests and my commute, trying to sound calm so I wouldn't feel abandoned. All that time my messages might have gone nowhere. Or worse, they might have gone to someone who was watching and waiting. Matteo didn't accuse me of helping Ethan. He treated my innocence like a probability he was testing. He conveyed that he believed I hadn't understood what Ethan was involved in. He said it like weather, as if my ignorance was inconvenient but believable. Shame still lit up under my skin, because he didn't need to list Ethan's red flags. I could feel them all at once. The sudden generosity, the vague stories, the way he kept his past foggy but wanted my trust in full daylight. I had called it romance because I wanted a break from being the woman who counts every dollar and checks every lock. Then he brought up the pregnancy. He didn't treat it like a moral judgment. He treated it like a variable that changed the whole board. I watched his eyes go briefly distant, as if he was calculating risk in real time. A baby made me more visible, more emotional, easier to pressure. It also made me more valuable to Ethan, if Ethan had anything human left in him. Mateo believed Ethan would come back for me once he realized I was pregnant. That thought made me dizzy, not because it felt tender, because it felt like a trap tightening. The ultrasound photo I'd sent by mistake suddenly felt like a signal flare. He expanded the stakes with the same calm precision. Mateo wasn't the only person hunting Ethan. Rivals were searching too. People who would use me as a shortcut, who wouldn't bother with rules or patience. In his world, the outside had become a hunting ground. He framed his estate as a wall, and he framed my presence here as the safest option he could control. My outrage rose anyway, hot and sharp. Protection I didn't choose felt like captivity. Safety that required my obedience felt like a cage lined with expensive fabric. Mateo acknowledged that without apology. He made it clear I would be treated as a guest. But guests had rules. Not the kind you negotiate. The kind you follow if you want to keep breathing easily. He conveyed the boundaries in plain terms. I wouldn't leave the property. I wouldn't have unsupervised access to a phone. I wouldn't wander. Meals would come to me. Medical care would be available. A suite would be comfortable enough to make me forget, for a second. That comfort can be used to soften resistance. And if I tried to run, he wouldn't make it dramatic. He would simply have me retrieved again, because the world outside didn't respect my freedom the way I wanted it to. I hated how practical it sounded. I hated that a part of me, the part that learned to think in lists since Leo was born, started weighing it. If my goal was to get back to my son alive, then fighting tonight might be the worst strategy. If my goal was to keep Leo from becoming bait too, then staying inside the wall might be the only move I had. Mateo ended the meeting the same way he entered it, with finality that didn't need volume. He conveyed that he would find what Ethan took, that he would handle whatever collision was coming, and that my job was simple. Stay alive, stay inside, follow the structure, and let his people do what they were trained to do. I was still standing there, still trying to swallow the truth that the man I loved had been a thief inside someone else's empire, when Elena returned like a cue. She didn't look surprised to see me rigid. She looked ready. As she guided me out, the study's leather and books smell faded behind us, replaced by stone and quiet. The hallway felt longer on the way out. The doors felt heavier. The silence felt less like peace and more like pressure. I kept thinking the same impossible thought as Elena led me toward my assigned suite. The man I feared might be the only wall between me and people who wouldn't bother offering water first. The door to my suite closed with a soft final click that somehow felt louder than the helicopter. For a second, I just stood there, staring at space that didn't make sense. The room was bigger than my whole apartment in Dorchester. A 4-poster bed sat like a piece of history. White linens pulled so tight they looked pressed. There was a sitting area with a couch, a low table set with a tray, and a fireplace framed in stone. Tall windows looked out on a garden sloping toward black water and pine silhouettes. My first instinct wasn't awe. It was to look for exits. I counted doors. Bathroom. Closet. Main door. Now shut. I tried the window. It opened an inch and stopped, like the house decided how much air I was allowed. I checked the main lock, then checked it again, as if repeating the motion could make it true. Elena Mercer came in behind me with the same efficiency she'd had all night. She didn't bark rules. She delivered them like a policy, calm and clinical. I was permitted in this wing. I could walk the garden at certain hours and only with someone assigned to me. Meals would come here unless I was escorted elsewhere. If I needed medical attention, it could be arranged immediately. If I needed anything at all, I should ask her. The softness around it made my skin crawl. It asked my nervous system to accept this as reasonable, as temporary, as if captivity becomes polite when it comes with good lighting. Then I remembered Leo. The thought hit like ice under my ribs. Tonight he was with my mom in Quincy. The sleepover we'd planned weeks ago because I had a double shift at the clinic. He was safe, but he was also going to wake up and reach for me out of habit. If my mother didn't know where I was, she would panic. If Leo sensed that panic, he would carry it. I told Elena I needed to confirm he was safe, and that my mother needed to hear my voice. I kept it practical, because begging feels like handing someone your throat. Elena didn't argue. She left and returned with a phone that wasn't mine, sleek and plain, and she stayed close enough that I understood the terms. One supervised call. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. I made my voice steady anyway, the way I do when Leo trips and looks at me to decide whether to cry. I heard my mother's familiar kitchen sounds, the clink of a spoon, the low hum of the television she always leaves on. I let her tell me Leo had eaten, had laughed, had fallen asleep fast. I told her I was dealing with something unexpected, that I was safe, and that she should keep his morning normal. I didn't give her a location or a story. I gave her my voice, steady and alive, and that was all. When the call ended, Elena took the phone without a pause, like she'd been holding her breath too but would never show it. The tray on the table pulled my attention next. Soup that smelled like real vegetables, toast cut into neat triangles, fruit, washed and sliced. Next to it, a mug of tea that steamed gently, with the subtle scent of chamomile. No caffeine bite. Decaf. Like someone had checked a pregnancy-safe list and decided they didn't want my heart racing more than it already was. I hated that my body responded. My shoulders loosened a fraction. My stomach, which had been clenched for hours, gave a small, grateful ache. Comfort isn't moral. It doesn't ask permission. It just happens, and then you're left feeling ashamed for being human. In the closet, fresh clothes hung in my exact size. Soft leggings, a sweater that didn't itch, underwear sealed in paper packages, slippers set beneath them like I'd been expected. I didn't have to wonder how they knew. That was the point. The bathroom was marble and light, and it made me angry in a way I couldn't explain. Towels folded into perfect stacks, toiletries lined up with unnerving precision, all unscented and medical-looking, a new toothbrush, ginger candies in a small bowl, as if nausea was a schedule they'd already planned for. I stood at the sink and stared at myself until my reflection stopped looking like a stranger. My eyes were wide and too bright, like the tears were there, but my body refused to spend them. I pressed a hand to my stomach, still flat, still ordinary, and felt the weight of the ultrasound paper that had started all of this. I made a quiet promise to the baby and to Leo. I would not disappear. I would not let this place turn me into a quiet person who accepts whatever is decided for her. Elena returned with another update, delivered the same way she delivered rules. My employer had been contacted. A leave of absence had been arranged. My schedule had been cleared. There would be no frantic coworkers calling my phone, no missing person spiral, no reason for anyone to go looking in places that would lead here. That was when the fear changed shape. Before, I'd been afraid of what they could do to me. Now I understood they could edit me. They could smooth the edges of my absence so Leo wouldn't feel it, so my mother wouldn't call the police, so the world would keep turning without noticing I'd been removed. I walked back into the sitting area and noticed something I'd missed. A house phone on the side table, the kind rich people keep for convenience. It had only a few buttons, labeled in tiny text. When I lifted it, the line was already alive with a faint hum, like it was waiting. I set it down too carefully. Then I realized my own phone wasn't here at all. Not misplaced, not forgotten, but removed so cleanly there wasn't even a charger cable left behind. My purse sat on a chair, arranged as if someone had studied how I drop things when I'm tired. My wallet was inside. My keys were inside. Everything that made me feel normal was present, except the one object that held my life. Elena's earlier language replayed in my head. Not call, not text, ask. The truth settled over me, heavy and slow. Even when they let me speak, it would be through channels they controlled. Even when I thought I was alone, this estate would still be a system, and I would be a moving part inside it. I sat on the edge of that huge bed, listening to the quiet, feeling safe and comfortable and trapped all at once, and I understood that my old life had already been paused without my consent. Daylight made the estate look almost normal, and that was the cruel trick. In the morning the cliffs were clear, the water beyond them flat and gray, and the grounds perfectly kept. From far away, it could have been a quiet New England landmark. Up close, it was still a fortress, just one that hid its defenses inside good taste. Elena Mercer led me back through the halls with the same efficient calm. In sunlight, I saw what the night had blurred. A camera tucked into carved wood, a door that unlocked only after her hand brushed a discreet panel, a man in plain clothes whose eyes tracked corners instead of paintings. Nothing here was casual. The study looked less ominous in daylight, but it still felt like a room where decisions got made without asking permission. I stood on the rug and kept my hands together so they wouldn't shake. My body wanted to run. My mind forced it to stay. Matteo De Luca was already there. He didn't make an entrance. He didn't raise his voice. He simply occupied the space with quiet certainty. In daylight, he felt even more controlled. And control is what scared me most. He shifted into planning mode. He laid out the situation cleanly, as if facts could keep emotions contained. Ethan Cole had worked for him for years. Ethan stole $2 million and a flash drive with sensitive material. Then Ethan went further and sold information to a rival Russian crew. Matteo treated it like a breach that spread damage outward. When he said people had already died because of what Ethan sold, he didn't describe anything. He didn't need to. My stomach tightened anyway, because the message was simple. This was bigger than a missing boyfriend. This was a world where mistakes have weight. Then he delivered the detail that snapped my fear into focus. The rival Russians had gone to my Boston apartment after I vanished. My mind jumped to the front door, the cheap lock, the narrow hallway that always smelled like someone else's dinner, the neighbor's plants by the stairwell. I pictured strangers standing where Leo used to hop on one foot while I searched for my keys. I pictured my life being examined like a file. The first thing I wanted was Leo. Not even myself. Not even answers. Just my son. I thought about his morning routine, his bus stop, the small soft details that anchor me when everything else shifts. But Matteo's calm pinned the truth in place. I couldn't run back to my old life because my old life had already been found. Boston wasn't a hiding place. It was a map. Anger flared, and it came with shame. Anger at Ethan for dragging me into this. Shame at myself for ignoring signs I didn't want to see. Ethan paying too easily. Ethan having cash when my account was always tight. Ethan talking about work like it was fog. I had wanted the romance. Now I saw the cover. Matteo believed Ethan would come back once he realized I was pregnant. Not because Ethan had a pure heart, but because emotion can be used. The plan was to pull him into a public meeting, a place where he would feel safe enough to show up, where he could be watched without being startled into another disappearance. Matteo would be nearby but unseen. His team would blend in, ready to close in only if needed. I pushed back inside myself, insisting I wanted answers more than I wanted to play a role. But the plan was built around the fact that Ethan still knew my face and my body, and now he would know the baby too. Matteo's people would be scattered through the location like background noise. A couple at a corner table, a man with a laptop, someone lingering near the door. Matteo would watch from a distance, close enough to act, far enough to stay invisible. Every angle would already be accounted for. I hated the word bait, even when I kept it inside my own head. But fear makes you practical, and motherhood makes you ruthless about survival. If the Russians were already hunting, refusing to cooperate didn't make me free. It just made me alone. That was when Matteo introduced the two things that turned planning into reality. He placed a pendant on the table. It was small, classic, and beautiful in a quiet way. The kind of jewelry that looks like it has a family story, and that was exactly what made it unsettling. Matteo explained it wasn't decoration. It would track me. It would listen. A mic and a locator, packed into something that could rest against my skin and look innocent. The violation hit first. Being wired felt like being reduced to evidence. Then the second feeling arrived, colder and harder. Relief. Because if something went wrong, this pendant might be the reason Matteo's team got to me in time. I hated that relief. I hated that it made sense. He gave me a code word too. Honeymoon. One simple word that could be spoken in a normal sentence without drawing attention. A clean trigger for intervention. If I said it, his people would move immediately. No debate. No waiting for me to explain. I repeated it silently, trying to make my mouth remember it. Honeymoon. Sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. We crafted the message for Ethan with careful restraint. Mention the pregnancy. Keep it personal enough to hook him. Keep it calm enough not to warn him. A time and a place that felt casual, not like a trap. The meet was set for 3 p.m. That time hit me like a clock dropping. 3 p.m. was ordinary. 3 p.m. was when my son might be eating lunch at my mother's kitchen table. 3 p.m. was now a countdown. Elena returned with city clothes. A dress that fit like it belonged to a steadier version of me. A coat that smelled new. Shoes meant for sidewalks, not marble floors. When Elena fastened the pendant at my throat, it settled against my skin with a small, intimate weight. It felt like protection. It felt like ownership. It felt like both, and I couldn't separate them. As we left the study and moved toward the waiting car, the estate stayed bright and beautiful behind me. I carried the code word behind my teeth like a prayer I didn't fully trust. Honeymoon. And ahead of me, the day narrowed down to one ordinary time that now meant everything: 3 p.m. At 3 p.m., I looked like any other woman in Boston killing time over coffee, not a woman sitting inside a trap I helped set. The cafe was quiet in that expensive, careful way. Warm wood, low music, a pastry case arranged like art. The air smelled like espresso and sugar, and every sound landed too cleanly. A spoon on porcelain, the hiss of milk steaming, the little chime over the door that kept snapping my nerves awake. I chose a table with sightlines to the entrance and the window's reflection of the street. It wasn't bravery. It was math. My fingers kept drifting to the pendant at my throat. Simple, pretty, normal. Under my fingertips, it warmed slowly, and the warmth made my skin crawl because it reminded me what it really was. A tracker. A mic. A leash disguised as jewelry. I hated how quickly my body treated it like safety anyway. One word sat in my mind like a loaded switch. Honeymoon. I tried to breathe normally. In, out, in, out. I kept thinking about Leo at my mother's apartment. Safe tonight because of a plan that used to feel ordinary. I pictured him brushing his teeth, asking for one more story, trusting I would be there in the morning. That trust was the only thing keeping me upright. 3 p.m. slid past. Every time the door opened, my chest tightened. I kept telling myself Ethan might not show, that maybe this would end with me walking out and going back to my son. Then the chime sounded again. Ethan Cole stepped inside like the room was hostile territory, baseball cap low, hoodie under a thin jacket. Wrong for early fall rain. He looked thinner than I remembered, like sleep had stopped being a place he could stay. His eyes swept the cafe for angles and exits, not for comfort. My heart betrayed me with recognition first. Then anger followed, hot and immediate. There were tiny familiar motions that hit me like a bruise. The way he rubbed his thumb along his knuckle, the way his gaze found mine and held for a beat too long. For a second I saw the man who carried Leo to bed when my arms were tired. Then I saw the rest of him, a man checking reflections, a man built for trouble. He came to my table fast and sat with an urgency he couldn't hide. I didn't reach for him. I kept my hands close to my cup, close to the pendant, close to whatever control I had left. He tried to explain the last 3 weeks without really explaining. He conveyed that silence was protection, that disappearing was a shield. The story sounded almost noble if you didn't look at the damage. Under it, I felt a push to steer me, to pull me into his version of reality. So I dropped the truth between us. I told him about the clinic and the ultrasound paper that still felt too bright to belong to my life. I told him I was pregnant. I didn't soften it. I let it land like a fact that couldn't be argued away. His face changed. Shock, real and messy. His eyes flicked to my stomach and back up, and I saw guilt flare, then the quick shift of his mind rearranging everything around this new weight. The baby made me more vulnerable. The baby also made me more valuable. And that thought turned my stomach cold. Almost immediately, he started trying to place me. Not with a clean question I could repeat, but with the shape of his attention. How he kept circling details. How he watched the door like he expected someone to walk in. How he angled his body like he might need to stand fast. He tried to wrap it in concern. It felt like reconnaissance. The pendant warmed against my pulse. Ethan talked about money like it was the only language that mattered. He admitted he took $2 million, and he framed it as a future he stole for us. He said he grabbed a flash drive with sensitive data for leverage. He spoke as if danger was just a price tag. He kept returning to the Russians. Through the rushed logic and the restless scanning, I understood he believed they were hunting him. He claimed he left to keep them away from me, that the only way to survive was to disappear fast and stay moving. A part of me wanted to believe him because believing him would mean I wasn't simply abandoned. Hope rose anyway, fast and sweet. Then Leo's face cut through it. Leo didn't need a fantasy. He needed a mother who made choices that held up in daylight. The baby inside me needed the same thing. I watched Ethan with a new kind of clarity. I noticed how quickly he moved from emotion to logistics, how he softened his expression right before he tried to guide me, how he never asked what I wanted, only what I would do. His version of safety required obedience. My anger sharpened. If he stole for us, why didn't he trust me with the truth? If he left to protect me, why did he let me walk into that clinic alone? If he cared about Leo, why did he vanish without a plan for the boy who had started to believe in him? I could feel the pendant when I swallowed. I imagined Mateo's perimeter, men placed in ordinary corners, waiting for one word from my mouth to move. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel exposed. Ethan pressed urgency harder. He had a way out that didn't involve the front door. He wanted us moving now, before anyone could stop us. He kept glancing toward the back, toward a service hallway that suddenly felt like the mouth of a tunnel. I felt trapped between two cages, a luxury one with rules, and a moving one with panic. Honeymoon pulsed in my mind again. I could end this. I could trigger the intervention, but I needed one more thing from Ethan. The moment where he'd show me who he was when the plan didn't go his way. So when he rose and signaled for me to follow, my body moved before my courage caught up. I stood. My knees went light, then steadied. I adjusted my coat with hands that didn't feel like mine. I touched the pendant once, a small press that was equal parts comfort and warning. I kept my face neutral, and my pace measured, like this was normal. We threaded between tables. The espresso machine hissed. Someone laughed softly. No one looked up. The world stayed ordinary while my life peeled open. Ethan slipped through the back first. The service corridor smelled like dish soap and hot metal. The cafe's warmth fell away behind me. The pendant pressed my pulse, and honeymoon waited, a quiet emergency button I prayed never to press. I stepped through the half-hidden door after him, and the moment I crossed that threshold, hope and dread tightened together in my chest, like one breath I couldn't fully take. The cafe's warmth died the moment I pushed through the service door. Behind me were cups and soft music and the illusion that nothing bad ever happened in places this clean. Ahead was a narrow corridor that smelled like dish soap and hot metal. Ethan moved fast, not checking on me, moving like he was trying to beat a clock. My shoes stuck for half a second on a wet patch near the back sink. That tiny delay sharpened everything. I heard my own breathing. I felt the pendant at my throat shift, warm against my skin, like a hand that wouldn't let go. Ethan pushed open the final back door, and the city changed textures. The alley was colder and narrower than the cafe, lit by harsh backdoor lamps that made every puddle look like ink. Trash bins lined the brick walls. The air carried rainwater and old cardboard, and the sound of Boston felt muffled, like the street had stepped back to watch. A sedan waited exactly where Ethan had steered me. Dark paint, tinted windows, engine already running. It should have been relief. Instead, my stomach sank. The driver was wrong in a way I couldn't explain away. He sat with a stillness that didn't belong to anxious friends. When he looked at me, it wasn't curiosity. It was appraisal. Not a person being seen, but an asset being assessed. And his accent was thick enough that it pulled words into unfamiliar shapes, even when he kept his tone calm. Hope collapsed in a single drop. I understood, all at once, that Ethan hadn't been running from the Russians. He had been walking me straight to them. The way his hand hovered near my elbow wasn't protection. It was control. He kept glancing between me and the driver like he was negotiating with his eyes, as if both of us needed to stay on script. My nausea rose so fast my mouth watered. I pressed a palm to my belly without thinking. I thought of Leo at my mother's house, already asleep, trusting that I was still the same person who kissed his forehead every night. I could not disappear. I could not gamble. I saw the trade for what it was. Leverage, insurance, collateral, and the baby made it worse. The baby made me valuable in a way that turned my skin cold. Ethan's face tightened when he realized I understood. He tried to pull me closer, tried to angle my body toward the rear door of the sedan. His grip increased just enough to hurt, the kind of pressure meant to make me obey without making a scene. I stopped moving. In my head, the last days at Mateo's estate snapped into place. The rules, the surveillance, the quiet insistence that safety was a system, not a feeling. I remembered the pendant being set in my palm like a gift, and a violation at the same time. I remembered the word that was supposed to open the door. Honeymoon. I needed the microphone to catch it. I needed my voice steady enough that it sounded like a stray thought, not a plea. My throat went dry. I could feel my pulse beating against the pendant's edge. I forced air into my lungs and let the word out clean, like I was confessing it to myself. Honeymoon. The weight of it landed right after. I wasn't just calling for help. I was choosing my child over the fantasy that Ethan's love was still real. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the alley changed again. Black SUVs rolled in from both ends, sealing the narrow space. Doors opened. Men moved with purpose, not panic. Weapons were raised, but the motion was controlled, practiced, meant to end a problem, not create one. The driver's calm cracked. He reached, but he never got far. Someone pinned his arm and stripped the situation down to mechanics. Quick, efficient. Ethan panicked. The shift in him was brutal without blood. 1 second he was the man I'd loved. The next he was a handler with a cornered animal stare. His hand jerked, and something hard pressed into my side through my coat, right under my ribs. I didn't see the weapon fully, but I felt the shape, the threat, the way it changed the air between us. My body went cold and precise. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. I narrowed to one goal: get away from that pressure without twisting wrong, without putting the baby at risk. And then I saw it. A red dot. It landed on Ethan's head like a steady fingertip. A laser sight. A message. One breath, one move, and you lose. Ethan felt it too. His eyes flicked. His breathing stuttered. That red dot didn't just threaten him. It distracted him. It pulled his attention outward, away from my center. I used the opening. I drove my elbow back and in, into the soft spot below his ribs, the solar plexus, exactly the way Elena had demonstrated in a quiet hallway. The impact was blunt. It stole his breath for a moment. That was all I needed. I twisted away from the pressure at my side, stepped low, and slipped free. A hand caught my arm from behind, firm but not rough, guiding me back. Pride was useless. I kept my palm on my belly as if I could hold my child in place through sheer will. Ethan staggered, coughing, still reaching. Hands took him. The weapon disappeared from his control with the same efficiency the driver had been handled. There was no chaos for its own sake, just a system closing in. And then Matteo De Luca was there. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. No vest, no helmet, no costume. He wore dark clothes that looked expensive because they fit him. Because he moved like the world made room. His presence cooled the alley. Men with guns became background. He didn't need to shout. I watched Ethan try one last maneuver, the oldest trick in his book. He tried to turn the baby into an argument, tried to frame himself as necessary, tried to make me doubt the choice I'd just made. Something in me went quiet. I saw the mask. I saw how easily love became a tool. Grief hit, sharp and clean, but it didn't make me weak. It made me clear. Matteo looked at me for a beat, and I felt the strange, complicated safety of being seen by someone who wasn't pretending. His concern was contained, controlled, but real. He motioned, and his people moved me toward the nearest SUV. As I climbed inside, my legs shook hard enough that the seat felt like it was moving. I pressed my fingers to the pendant again, not in gratitude, but in disbelief that a single word had split my life into before and after. The door shut. The alley vanished behind tinted glass. I sat there breathing, alive, and realized my definition of home had shifted toward the one place I'd sworn I would never accept. Matteo's world had saved me, and that terrified me almost as much as Ethan's betrayal. Outside, I caught a final glimpse of Ethan on the wet pavement, restrained, still twisting like a man trying to rewrite reality. Matteo's hand hovered near my back, never quite touching, steering me anyway. Inside the SUV, the air smelled like leather and rain. I fumbled for my phone, then remembered it didn't matter. I just kept breathing and thinking of Leo's routine. Was Matteo my protector, my captor, or both, and what could I possibly choose now that the fantasy was dead? I barely remember the first turn the SUV took. I remember the sealed hush, and my own breathing sounding too loud in a space that smelled like rain and leather and someone else's control. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Outside the tinted glass, Boston slid by in fragments, brick, wet pavement, taillights. Yet none of it felt like my city anymore. The alley replayed in flashes. Ethan's grip, that hard pressure at my side, the red dot, the way my elbow found the soft spot under his ribs because my body chose survival before my mind could catch up. Every blink brought the moment my hope snapped in half. The men in front didn't look back. They didn't need to. Even the route felt rehearsed. I wasn't rescued. I was transferred. The pendant rested at my throat, warm from my skin, heavier than it should have been. I kept touching it, as if the small oval could anchor me. And then the understanding landed. The word I'd forced out honeymoon hadn't been a random thought. It had been a key inserted into a lock that was already waiting. That realization hit harder than the weapon ever could, because it meant someone had been listening the whole time, not just at the cafe, not just in the alley, listening while I believed I still owned my privacy, listening while I tried to be brave. My mouth tasted metallic. I swallowed and tried to breathe the way I used to when Leo woke from nightmares and needed me steady. My body didn't believe the trick. It kept bracing. The SUV slowed into a secured entrance that looked ordinary until you noticed the details. The camera angles, the barrier that rose without a pause, the way 2 doors had to open before one would. I was guided inside with hands that never grabbed, only steered. Kindness could still be a leash. The medical check happened in a quiet room that smelled like clean sheets and antiseptic. A cuff tightened around my arm. A calm voice spoke near me. More rhythm than words. Someone asked what mattered. How far along? Any bleeding? Any pain? I heard myself answer no, no, no. Like I was bargaining with the universe. When cool gel touched my skin, memory surged fluorescent lights, thin paper, my own shock leaving the clinic. I stared at the ceiling and tried not to cry. Then there was a brief, steady pulse, and my chest loosened in a small, shaking collapse. Relief didn't feel like joy. It felt like permission to keep standing. In that quiet, I spoke to the baby the way I speak to Leo when he can't sleep. I apologized for the risk. I promised I would stop confusing fear with fate. I promised I would plan, hold the line, and never gamble my children's lives for a story that wants to be beautiful. By the time I was escorted out, my hands had steadied, but my thoughts were sharp. Matteo De Luca was waiting in a corridor that looked too elegant to admit violence. His face gave nothing away, yet his attention landed on me like weight. I felt comfort and threat in the same breath. He didn't carry the energy of a man relieved he'd arrived in time. He carried the energy of a man confirming that a plan had worked. And that was the second truth I had to swallow. The trap in the alley hadn't sprung by accident. It had sprung because I said the code word, because the pendant caught it, because his people were positioned to pull me out the second I proved I understood the betrayal. I hated how clean it was. I hated that I was alive because of it. Then a third truth slid into place. I saw it in the way his team moved, in the fast messages passed without faces changing. This wasn't only about saving me. This had been a net meant to flush out the Russians and whoever inside the city had been helping them. My location had been a lure. My voice had been the signal. It didn't make him cruel. It made him strategic. And my anger flared so hot I almost welcomed it. I wanted to tell him I wasn't a tool, that my baby wasn't currency, that my life wasn't a square on his board. But anger didn't change the map. There were enemies I couldn't name, and a war Ethan had dragged to my doorstep. Ethan. The thought of him turned my stomach. Somewhere beyond that corridor, his fate was being decided in rooms I would never enter. I didn't need details to know it was final. I mourned the man I thought I loved, the version I carried to survive lonely nights. I felt disgust for the man he proved himself to be, the one who tried to trade my body like collateral. That grief didn't excuse him. It just proved I had been human. Being a single mom in a city that eats paychecks and patience makes you hungry for someone who says you don't have to do it alone. I had believed what I needed. Matteo gave me something that looked like choice, even while I could see the cage around it. I could leave, but not into the street with a target on my back. I could return to routines, but not while people who treat leverage like oxygen were hunting for me. I could refuse his protection, but refusal wouldn't rewrite the world Ethan opened. It would only remove the wall between me and whatever waited outside. So I made my own boundary inside the only space I could control. I chose safety and time. I chose temporary protection, not surrender. In my mind, I set rules for myself. I would not confuse comfort with consent. I would not let gratitude turn into ownership. I would keep Leo anchored in every decision, and I would keep my name, my voice, my future. On the drive back toward the estate, the landscape looked different through the window. The beauty felt less like a dream and more like infrastructure. The kindness had a blueprint. The silence had cameras. At the doors, Elena's presence reminded me that rules were rules. I watched her note my condition, the chain at my neck, the way my shoulders stayed tense, and I knew tomorrow would be about boundaries. I walked back into the fortress knowing I hadn't been saved into freedom. I'd been saved into a system, and the next battle wouldn't be escaping enemies. It would be learning how to live inside Matteo's world without losing myself, and without mistaking protection for a kind of love that takes. I woke up in a room so perfect it felt borrowed. The sheets were smooth. The air smelled like cedar and clean linen. For a few seconds, my mind floated, and then my body remembered the alley and pulled me under. My hand went to my belly before my eyes fully opened. A roll call. I told the baby I was here, that I was still choosing, and I waited for pain. There was nothing, and that should have been relief. Instead, it made me tense, because danger had stopped shouting and started moving quietly through systems. I sat up, and the house responded like it had been watching the exact angle of my shoulders. A soft knock, a tray with decaf tea, oatmeal, fruit cut into neat slices. Someone had chosen it like a list, gentle, prenatal, safe. I felt grateful and insulted. Comfort can be kindness. Comfort can also be leverage. Back home, mornings were messy and real. The radiator clanked. The hallway smelled like wet coats. Leo's backpack lived on a hook by the door, always half unzipped because he was 6 and life moved faster than zippers. Here, nothing was out of place. The calm had been engineered. I walked to the window. Gardens spread out below like a postcard, trimmed into obedience. Beyond the trees, gray water flashed. In daylight, the estate was almost beautiful. That made it worse, because a fortress doesn't need to look like one. I tried the door the way you test a stove burner, careful and rational. The handle turned and met a soft resistance. Not a dead bolt. A gentle stop. A pause. The door opened a few inches, and a staff member I didn't recognize was there, with a polite smile and eyes that never wandered. She didn't say no. She simply existed in the space where my freedom would have gone. That was the first lesson of the morning. This place didn't refuse. It redirected. I showered because I needed the alley off my skin. The hot water helped until the mirror reminded me my nervous system was still stuck on concrete and backdoor light. My hands shook. I pressed a palm to my stomach again and promised, privately, that I would not let fear make my next decision for me. Leo needed a mother. This baby needed time. Then I started mapping, because I can't help it. I noticed staff timing. I noticed the half-beat delay between my movement and a quiet movement outside my door. I couldn't see cameras, but I could see the effects of being watched. The estate ran like a machine built to prevent surprises. The terrifying part was how much my body liked that. My shoulders lowered when I realized the perimeter was tight. I hated myself for relaxing. I hated that safety and captivity were wearing the same face. Around 9 a.m., Elena Mercer arrived with a folder held like a boundary. Her posture was precise, her expression all professional detachment. She conveyed where I could go, when, and how accompaniment would work, as if we were discussing a hotel policy instead of my life. The reasonableness was its own humiliation. I wasn't being threatened. I was being managed. Leo's name rose in my throat like a cough. I needed confirmation again, even though I had already gotten it. Elena relayed that my mother had been contacted through a believable channel, that she thought I was dealing with a sudden work emergency, and that Leo was safe and asleep and would go to school like normal. After Elena left, I found the twist that flipped my emotions fast enough to make me dizzy. It was waiting in the sitting area, arranged with the same neatness as breakfast, a replacement phone in a plain box, a new number printed on a card, a clipped stack of papers, a drafted leave request for my job, a confirmation that my rent had been paid, notes about utilities staying current, childcare options near my mother, and a hospital contact on call. There was even a short prenatal appointment outline that assumed I would remain under protection. Help. Real, practical help. And proof. Cold proof. That my life outside had been handled like a project. That this house hadn't just swallowed me. It had been sitting inside my life for weeks. Watching. Preparing. Waiting for the moment I would break. Relief hit first, because exhaustion makes anything that holds you feel like rescue. Then anger hit, sharp and clean, because I hadn't agreed to any of it. I carried the papers to the window and stared at the gardens until my vision steadied. I wanted to tear the stack in half. I also wanted to sleep, because my body was still tasting metal, and my mind was still replaying the moment Ethan's mask slipped. I touched my belly and forced my priorities into order. Pride later. Survival now. That was when Mateo entered. So quietly he seemed to arrive with the room itself. He didn't rush me. He didn't crowd me. He stopped at a distance that felt chosen, like he understood that proximity can be violence even without touch. His presence carried authority the way the estate did. Understated, controlled, inevitable. I understood what he meant without needing a speech. He had contained the fallout. He had built a cover story that protected my mother from panic and protected Leo from questions. He had made my outside life look continuous so enemies couldn't track the gap. He had done it with logistics, not drama. My chest tightened anyway. Protection didn't erase consent. Efficiency didn't excuse intrusion. So I set boundaries with clarity instead of pleading. I anchored them in my children. I needed predictable contact with my mother so Leo wouldn't feel me vanish again. I needed information about the threat, not just instructions. I needed medical decisions to involve me. I needed movement inside the estate, even limited, because confinement turns fear into rot, and I needed him to stop making choices about my identity without my approval. I expected irritation. What I saw instead was a man who recognized a line and absorbed it like a rule. His reaction wasn't softness, it was discipline. He didn't treat my boundaries as an inconvenience. He treated them as data, as structure, as something that could exist inside his machine without breaking it. That surprised me. It didn't comfort me, it complicated me. When he left, the room didn't feel lighter. It felt heavier, because the truth was clear now. Freedom wasn't a feeling. It was leverage. On paper, I could walk out. In reality, walking out without power would turn me into bait again, in a city full of people who saw value where I saw life. I sat down and held the pendant until it warmed my fingertips. I admitted something I hated admitting. Part of me felt safe for the first time in a long time. Not loved, not saved. Safe. And safety under someone else's control is its own kind of threat. By late afternoon, Elena returned with another folder, thinner and more formal. I didn't open it right away. I held it like a contract I hadn't signed. I could feel the shape of the offer inside. Legal cover, identity shielding, financial stability, a public arrangement designed to stop the hunting. It would sound like freedom on paper. It would demand a price in trust, and maybe in the version of myself I thought I was allowed to keep. I took a slow breath and made myself ready to hear it, because naivety had already almost gotten me killed. I didn't wake up to sirens anymore. That was the first strange gift. Around 7 a.m., the house was quiet in a way my Boston apartment never managed. No neighbors stomping down the hall, no bus brakes squealing outside my window, just soft air moving through old rooms, and the faint sound of water somewhere far off, like the world exhaling. My body didn't trust it. I lay still for a minute, waiting for my pulse to jump for no reason, waiting for the memory of harsh backdoor light and damp pavement to shove itself into the present. It still came, but softer now, like a scar being pressed instead of a wound being reopened. I put my hand over my belly and felt the steadiness there. Not the kind of steadiness that means nothing bad can happen. The kind that means I'm still here. The baby is still here. We made it through one more night. I used to measure my mornings by panic and math. Leo's cereal, Leo's shoes, a bus stop time to the minute, rent due dates, the exact number of dollars between me and a problem I couldn't fix. And then, those 3 weeks after Ethan vanished, my mornings became something worse. Waiting for a text that didn't come, waiting for a knock at my door that did. Now my mornings had a different rhythm, and I had to teach my nervous system how to live inside it. I swung my feet onto the floor. Cold stone, clean, real. I walked to the mirror and studied my own face like it belonged to someone I was responsible for. Under the softness, there was a new sharpness. My eyes looked like they'd learned something I couldn't unlearn. In the bathroom, the steam rose and wrapped around me, and for the first time since the clinic, I let myself remember the ultrasound without the wrong number, without the pounding, without the alley, just the image. Just the fact that I was growing a life while my own life was being hunted. I used to think motherhood was all instinct and sacrifice. It is, but it's also negotiation. It's drawing lines where other people think you have none. It's learning that love doesn't mean letting someone take your choices. When I came out, there was a tray again. Decaf tea. Food that didn't make my stomach twist. It still bothered me how accurate it was. How someone had memorized my body like a schedule. But I ate anyway. Not because I was being softened. Because my baby deserved calories more than my pride deserved drama. That was my new normal. Gratitude with teeth. The fallout didn't arrive as one big scene. It arrived as a slow rearranging of the world. A number changed. A lease got handled. A few names in the city stopped moving the way they used to. Not because the fear disappeared, but because it got boxed in by leverage and evidence and money that didn't blink. I learned, in small ways, what had been exposed. The rival crew wasn't some shadow that could reach forever. They were men who relied on people staying quiet and ashamed. They were men who believed women like me would fold, because folding is what the world trains us to do when we're tired and alone. What changed permanently was that I stopped acting like I was waiting to be punished. I stopped walking through rooms like I was already guilty for existing. I stopped apologizing in my head for having needs. I stopped bargaining with the universe as if I could trade enough goodness for safety. Safety doesn't come from begging. Safety comes from structure, from boundaries, from people who respect them, and from refusing to let shame do the enemy's work. The last piece that set me free came on a quiet afternoon when Elena placed a slim file on the table as if it weighed nothing. I almost laughed at that. A file like that can change a life. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it until my hands stopped trembling. Inside was proof that made my stomach go cold in a different way than fear. The surveillance hadn't started because I was special. It hadn't started because I was irresistible. It started because someone close enough to touch my everyday life had sold a map of it. A simple exchange, a building name, a routine, a phone number that I had been sending my hope into for 3 weeks, thinking it belonged to the man I loved. I didn't recognize the name at first. Not an enemy's name, a familiar one. A person connected to the edges of my life. A place I'd gone without thinking. A convenience that had never felt dangerous. That was the sharpest twist of all. Not that monsters exist, but that monsters often buy their access from ordinary hands. And in that moment, the self-blame finally snapped. I wasn't stupid for wanting love. I wasn't weak for hoping Ethan was real. I was lonely. I was exhausted. I was a single mom trying to keep a 6-year-old fed and safe in a city that charges you for every breath. I wanted someone to share the weight. That didn't make me deserving of a cage. It made me human. Mateo didn't deliver that truth like a performance. He didn't rub it in. He didn't demand gratitude for it. He let it sit on the table and waited for me to become the kind of woman who could look at it without breaking. That's what his code looked like, in the end. Not speeches, not grand gestures. Consistency, restraint, space. He was still dangerous. I never forgot that. He could still bend a city around a decision. He could still make doors open without asking twice. But he never pretended he was a fairy tale. He was a man with power and rules. And the strangest part was how much I needed rules, as long as they didn't erase me. So I made my final choice the way I make every choice now. Like a mother with a mission. I was not going back to my old apartment. Not because I was defeated, because that apartment had become a symbol of how visible I had been. How predictable, how easy to map. I didn't want Leo growing up in a place where his bus stop could be turned into leverage, but I also wasn't going to live as a permanent guest in someone else's fortress. My next home would be mine, in the only way that mattered. My consent would be part of its foundation. That meant a new place, protected and quiet, close enough to my mother that Leo's world stayed intact. That meant my mother would know the truth in the right way, at the right time, so I didn't build safety on lies. That meant prenatal care with a doctor who answered to ethics, not intimidation. That meant an agreement on paper that made it clear what help I was accepting and what I wasn't. It meant I negotiated my life like it was worth negotiating. And Mateo's role became clear in the only language that felt honest to me. He was not my captor anymore, even though he had been. He was not my savior, even though he protected me. He was not my love story, even though part of me felt the pull of how he showed up when everything fell apart. He was a shield with a human face. A complicated man who chose to protect 2 lives he didn't create. A man whose care came with gravity, and whose gravity could become a cage if I forgot myself. So I didn't forget. I allowed closeness the way you allow a door to stay unlocked when you finally trust the lock. Slowly. On purpose. With eyes open. Family used to mean blood and history and whatever mess you were born into. Now it means something else. Sometimes family looks like a kitchen table where Leo does homework and I make decaf tea and my hands don't shake anymore. Sometimes it looks like my mother learning the truth and choosing not to turn away. Sometimes it looks like Elena, stern and efficient, showing up every morning at the same time because consistency is its own kind of care. Sometimes it looks like a powerful man standing far enough away to give me space, but close enough that I know I'm not alone in the dark. Family can be chosen. Family can be built. Family can be defended without being possessed. That's the lesson I had to learn the hard way. Love is not ownership, and protection without respect is just another cage. The fear didn't vanish overnight. There are still moments when a car door shutting too hard makes my heart sprint. There are still nights when I wake up and taste that metallic panic and have to remind myself that I'm not in an alley anymore. But I'm not waiting to be punished now. I'm deciding. And if you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, if you've ever had to redefine family because the one you trusted broke you, I'd really love to hear what helped you most. What boundaries saved you? What new normal looked like when you finally stopped holding your breath? If this story hit something real for you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and leave a comment. I read them, and I think sometimes the safest thing we can give each other is proof that we're not alone.